Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Fringe Talkback, where we are going to delve into some super exclusive insider information. Tonight, we are talking about The Bassoonist, which hopefully you all just watched and witnessed the glory of. My name is Kate Coley, and I am the Talkback producer for this year's Cincy Fringe, which means that anytime you want to see a Talkback, you're going to see it because of me, and I'm going to be there asking questions of our artists. So today I am here with Sean. And Sean, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us all the different roles you played on this project for The Bassoonist?
Well, hi everyone. My name is Sean P. Meddy. I am I'm the executive artistic director for Autumn Kaleidoscope. In the production of The Bassoonist, I was the writer and the actor and the director and the stage manager and a not so great fight coordinator.
Wonderful. So we've got 6 roles so far. I bet we could come up with a couple more. Maybe if we go by each character.
Oh, sure.
So this is a really unique play because it comes from the story of this rivalry that is famous among classical musicians, and I assume like all bassoonists, but probably not very famous among other people who aren't familiar with classical musical rivalries. So I'd love to know how you originally learned about this story and what made you say, I'm going to make this into a play.
Yeah. So I should state first that I, in fact, do not play the bassoon. I have never played the bassoon. So that's not where I heard the story. In all honesty, I first heard this story a couple years ago. I was at an Arts Wave meeting, and I keep a small notebook with me, usually at all times, to scribble down things I may hear that might pique my interest. And then I found one of them when I was trying to figure out an idea for the show. And I was flipping through, and I had 3 words: Bach fights bassoon. So I was like, oh, maybe that's something worth investigating. So that's how I heard. Honestly, I'd never heard of it, even as a conservatory trained student. Although I was not a bassoonist, I hadn't heard it there, but I probably would have if I had been an instrumentalist.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so that's very interesting. So it appeared in your notebook full of ideas as something to pursue. So your production company, which you mentioned, you are the executive director of, is that your title?
Executive artistic director.
There we go. Executive artistic director. We spend time making the labels. We might as well use them. Of Autumn Kaleidoscope. And your mission is to bring well-researched productions to the stage. So I would love to know how this mission came about, and just a little bit more about why, that's at the core of the theater that you make.
I think when it first made its appearance known, so our very first show was a show called Furlesque, which was a burlesque show for furries.
Mm-hmm. I think that was that in 2016.
That was in 2016.
Yeah, that was the year that I did Fringe Next. I remember seeing all the information about that.
Yep. It's that classical coming of age story.
Exactly.
In a burlesque club. And in the course of that show, I had created the show, and then my stage manager and I hadn't done as much research. I did some. There was a lot of assumptions. And then maybe a month before, maybe not even that, might have been a few weeks before we opened, there was a podcast that interviewed the furry community that my stage manager found. She passed it along to me and was like, oh, well, I was completely wrong. Because the assumption is it's all about sex. And it's not, in fact, because as we learned, and it makes sense why, if it was all about sex, why would you have incredibly warm suits on? Nothing about that. So there is a small section, there is a small group that's, yes. And then from that point on, I wanted to make sure that all our shows were well researched. I did a show on William Howard Taft, and that was almost a year's worth of research.
Wow.
That went into that. I think the reason I like researching so much, I think it helps validify anything that you kind of present. Mm-hmm. I think it helps. It's a definite, I don't want to say it
it helps you back up the fiction that you're creating or whatever story you're creating. It gives you a stronger basis, you know?
Yeah. It's like I don't want to say that it's lying, but it's like the best lies are the ones that have a little bit of truth in them.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
feel like if your play is about something, you want to know as much as you can about it before you write. Unless it's completely a work of fiction, but I think even then you're going to have something
Yeah,
that you're
that makes
drawing
sense.
upon.
Exactly. And especially for these historical plays like your Taft play and this play, which of course is not contemporary, as contemporary as burlesque, you know, even more, there's even more to draw from. Um, you know.
Well,
So
yeah,
yeah.
I was going to
Yes.
talk about production history, but we're not here about that. We're
You're
about the
more than welcome
bassoonist.
to. I was going to ask
No,
you
no.
what kind of research materials you delved into for the Bassoonist, because you talked about using podcasts for Lesk and that being a big source of information. So, what were your inspirations and research sources for this one?
So for the bassoonist, this whole situation was slightly different. I usually like to have a while. I usually develop shows over a course of several months.
Mm-hmm.
With everything that happened with COVID-19, um, the original production I was going to bring to the stage was not feasible at all, which is fine. It's fine. It was a large, huge cast
Mm-hmm.
puppet fantasy show
Wow.
that, yeah, that's wasn't going to happen. um, so I had to change directions fairly quickly. So, um, I knew that this had legs as a potential show, and I went very quickly into research mode.
Mm-hmm.
Um, with libraries and everything being closed, I was pretty much forced for the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, I found a couple books, whole books online that I was able to draw from. The best one was Johann Sebastian Bach, A Learned Musician by Christoph Wolf, not Christoph Waltz. Christoph Waltz may have made a book on Johann Sebastian Bach. I don't know. I don't judge. But no, and that had the most information about the event, and then it had a lot of footnotes.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond that, Germany has exceptionally good court records. So
Oh.
yeah, a lot of what you see, especially the verdict at the end, is pretty close to the verdict that was handed down.
Wow. Yeah.
Um,
That's great. Yeah,
so
because Ricky and Dana from our audience actually asked us what primary sources you used. So the court records, that's really special that you still have that.
I got it from a source and a source, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty much, yeah. And it's one of those, a lot of people, if you are a Johann Sebastian Bach fan, this is not the show necessarily for you. I will admit, I didn't know much about Bach going into this.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize how much of an roustabout he was. I mean, in all seriousness, he got into fights. The stuff with the organist, him throwing the organist and attacking him with a dagger is honestly true. That was a story that happened. It's one of those, sometimes it's one of those old adage. It's like truth is better than fiction sometimes. Mm-hmm. It's just like, why do you need to invent some stuff when these events happened?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know for me, I hadn't heard of this story despite having played lots of Bach, being a classically trained pianist. I never knew any of this stuff. And learning inventions and stuff on the piano growing up, I was sort of like, well, Bach is kind of boring and steady. And then I learned this whole story about how much of a roustabout, as you said, he was. And I think that anyone else who had any preconceived notions of Bach and didn't know this story was probably very pleasantly surprised by the outrageousness that this story brings us. Yeah. So, as you mentioned, you had to totally change directions for this year's Fringe, and quickly. So, I would love to know some of the things you've learned putting together a show, not only as basically one person being the central performer outside of the voices that are used, but I would love to know a little bit about what your rehearsal process was like, what it felt like rehearsing. You've done, small cast and solo things before, but what it was like doing that and then digitizing, and maybe what you'll take away from this weird experience, this kind of weird experience.
Well, and what I would say is I had up to this point a long-standing tradition of I wouldn't direct anything that I was in.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, because I'm super critical of my work and I don't make the best director to myself. Um, I shot for 11 and a half hours of
Wow.
footage.
Oh
And
my
then,
gosh.
because I would not be happy with the takes, I shot on 2 different cameras. Um, and there are some outtakes where director Sean is yelling at actor Sean, and then actor Sean is going over to stage manager Sean looking for advice, and then stage manager Sean says nothing helpful. So
A challenge.
yeah, it was definitely a challenge. Um, I I knew I wanted to have 2 cameras.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, I've had a lot of film editing experience. Um, it was still slightly more difficult than I thought piecing some of this together. There are some takes that I'm super proud of the transitions in the show that people hopefully have seen. And there
Mm-hmm.
are others I'm like, oh, if I was just sitting an inch over, but I wasn't going to retake the whole thing for an
Of
inch.
course.
But yeah, um, it, it is an experience. I probably would say that I would do it again,
Mm-hmm.
but not happily.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I
The
think that
beauty, yeah,
I was just going to say, I think that what's interesting about having the chance to digitize your work, if you're not going to do it like one take and go, and we're just going to take it how it is, having the chance to do multiple camera shots, it gives you this opportunity to be kind of a perfectionist in the way that we aren't necessarily used to in live theater. And that's a blessing and a curse if you are a perfectionist.
yeah. And in all honesty, when I went back through the takes, there'd be some where I was like for example, the whole end of the show, like the last, I would say 14 minutes of the show,
Mm-hmm.
I would just record it in one big chunk.
Mm-hmm.
So there may be a line in there that I am not happy with how it came out in the end, but the take that people saw, it was the only one that for me like made it all the way through the end that I was like, yep, we're going with that. That's at the
Yeah,
end of a long recording session, you're just like, I'm done. I'm so done.
absolutely. Yeah, that's a big challenge of working solo and also being the only person in the room. Um, yeah, so I don't know. Is there anything you think that you learned from this process in a more positive way? Because of course it's not ideal to be directing and acting and stuff. I'd love to know some of the takeaways that you've
Ab-
gotten.
Absolutely. And I don't mean to hearken on those hard
No,
parts.
of course it's just a
It's
reality
yeah, it's a
of the
reality.
form.
I would say I'm very fortunate that I was cast in Fetus and the God, the no radio production before this,
Yes.
because I did not have as much audio recording experience before this. So I learned a lot from that
Yeah.
production and it was able to bring a lot of that over into this, very fortunately. So that I learned that I can create a performance space in my basement.
Mm-hmm.
um, I learned how to create makeshift light trees. So that's
Can I ask how you made your makeshift light trees?
oh sure. So I have two. Yeah.
Paint us a picture.
Okay. So I'm actually in my space right now.
Great.
There's a light tree here. There's a light tree here, and then there's this old, like huge like desk workstation that has like it goes up to like here and it
Oh my
has
God.
all like there's a big empty cubby and there's cabinets and cubbies all over it. So there were center lights right there, and then the light tree over here. There's 3 different lights. Both light trees have 3 different lights. They're I think they're Black and Hammer like light stands for construction sites with no lights
Mm-hmm.
on them, because if you got the ones that had the lights on them, they were super expensive. So instead, there's like these different lights clamped onto them. So I mean, it it works.
I can see you.
Yeah.
That's
And
great.
then black curtains in the background. The
Yeah.
performance space. so so fun little fact. The performance space I performed the show in is almost the same size as the performance space we had for my show last year in the Art Academy.
Yep.
And that was a multicast show, so I had plenty of room
Yeah. Yeah.
down here.
Great. Let's see. Yeah, so as you said, you've done, a lot of work at the No. We have a question from Liz Carmen that I think we should honor because we love
Yeah, I
Liz
see
Carmen.
it.
And she wants to know who's the prettiest of the voice actors you worked with. Why don't you tell us a little bit actually about incorporating voice acting into the show as well while you answer that question, perhaps?
Well, I feel like that's a very weighted question. I'd have to say the prettiest voice actor was my mother.
Good answer.
Yep, that's
Can't
what
be
I'm
mad
going
about that
with.
one. Yep.
No, but I think with a show like this, I needed to incorporate, if I could do it all by myself, but that's no fun at all. So I got my parents to do, my father was the magistrate, and then my mother was a proprietress. She had one line. And then Liz Carmen very graciously stepped in to play the part of Barbara Bachen. I will add that for my father, the last thing theatrically that he was in was his senior year in high school at Anderson High School in 1968.
Wow.
So it's a long drought, but he finally has a theatrical
But what a
credit.
comeback.
What a comeback. Oh.
Well, that's really fun that you got to, work with your parents. I was going to say use your parents, but work with your parents seems more appropriate. Yeah, that's great. And like you said, it's like, how can I bring other people in while also making this quick and not too complicated for myself? So earlier you mentioned that you carry your little notebook with you everywhere. I would love to have a little peek into the notebook and say, what are some recent inspirations you've come across, things that you're curious about, things you maybe might make a play about in the future, anything like that.
Well, I don't have the notebook on me because it's upstairs right now. I changed clothes to look fancy for this. But I would say that right now, I have a couple things in the works. They're all in the research stage. I have a follow-up show for the William Howard Taft show, which focuses on his wife, Nellie Taft, who,
Very cool.
after I did the initial William Howard Taft show, in all the research for that, I became very aware that I had to do one on her because she is one of the most intelligent, fascinating women that I've ever come across. She basically, this whole plan of him becoming president, it was, she had her own ideal. She wanted to basically be a first lady, and by God, she did it.
Yeah.
There's that. There's a whole nother piece about, about gorillas that I'm researching now. That in its own way is a companion piece. And I say companion pieces; these aren't sequels, but it's a companion piece to my piece last year about Martha, the Last Passenger Pigeon.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of these require research. I have a couple of original stuff in the works that we'll see where they go.
In the works.
Cool. I think the important thing is you have to absorb and just listen. I think that's a huge thing, is listen. And sometimes people say things off the top and it's something you may never have heard of before. And some of that small things make the best stories.
Absolutely. Yeah. So with that, I want to ask you, since we just have a couple minutes left before we need to get ready for the news, how can we support you and your work moving forward? Where can we learn more about it?
Yeah. So moving forward, I do have a significant project that will be releasing soon. I don't necessarily want to release it here or talk about it here. It's the right place, but not the right time.
Totally.
So what I would say is, if you really want to help support some of the art that I make moving forward, Follow me on Instagram. Follow me on Twitter. I'm going to be making a lot of announcements in about a week or so.
Great.
Hopefully, I'm at the Sean Metti. So TheSeanMettee. I mean, you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm on YouTube. Will be something big soon, so
Cool.
that's where we're heading.
We
So
have lots of places to keep an eye out for your upcoming work. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, for sharing a bit about your process and the pros and cons. I really appreciate your honesty in talking about that. It's something that I'm asking a lot of our fringe artists, and I'm constantly surprised, pleasantly surprised by how open about the good and the bad people are in digitizing fringe this year. I think it's very special that we get to have these little backstage passes and talk to our artists. Everyone watching, make sure you stay tuned for the news this evening. And after that, we have OTR Improv at 9 o'clock. So it'll be on Facebook live stream another time. Another time. It'll be on Facebook Live at 8:30. There we go. And then if you're interested in these talkbacks, the next time I will be on is on Wednesday at 8 o'clock for Dreary Deary. Thank you, Sean, again for everything. And everyone stay tuned for the news.